I'm here holding a very well-worn copy of a very beloved book of mine that I found a couple of years ago in a Jerusalem bookstore. And I have the schus, the great merit and privilege to be sitting with the author of that book, Professor Allen Hoffman. How are you doing today, Professor?
Feeling very good, very good. I'm delighted that you're here, Shlomi. Thank you for coming.
Phenomenal. Okay, so I would like to read to you one of my favorite lines from the book, and then I want to start with that and hear a little bit about what went into that line. We'll jump right in. So this comes from the story Beggar Moon, and the story really begins with a phenomenal and beautiful meditation on the idea of beginnings, ends, and middle, and the difference between the history as experienced by Jewish people and as history experienced by other groups and other nations. So I recommend everybody read the beginning of the story. But there's just one line here that I want to read. And for the first time, it dawned on me that someone led the National League in batting the year that 2 million Jews died in Auschwitz. Who can comprehend the middle? So could you take me into that line? Because I see that throughout all the stories in this book, there's a lot of wrestling with, facing up to the topic of suffering, which is such a human concern, but certainly in Jewish ideas and Jewish texts, such a major concern for us, such a major question. And it definitely is coming through in your book. So can you take me into that line a little bit?
Yes, I certainly can. But I think, can we take one step further back? Can you read it came out of a metaphor with tzitzit.
Tzitzis, yes, I'll read the entire section. The story takes place during the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur arrived, and I donned my shroud for the Day of Atonement. White shrouds, for white is the color of the angels. Shrouds, for life is the name of the game. And in the morning a man walked in and told us that the Arabs had attacked Israel. And we turned to pray, as is the custom, for we wear shrouds, and they do the dying. We prayed, and after the Day of Atonement, we ran to bless the moon. How quickly we blessed the moon, before we dashed home for news. What is happening? Have they stopped them yet? And the news was not good. The war dragged on for too long. The nation is small, the wound is large, and the precious blood flows quickly. And the relentless, steely, cold fear of destruction hovered over a small people of flesh, and the threads were soaked in blood. The holiday season continued, and so did the blood. It was a fear such as I have never known. How could we rejoice? Yet we tried. Talk about threads, an impenetrable snarl, and I repented of my arrogant sin. The threads were not simply Blumas and the moons, but the threads of an entire nation. And in the middle of it all, the war, the fear, there was a pennant race. Who could care? And for the first time, it dawned on me that someone led the National League in batting the year 2 million Jews died in Auschwitz. Who can comprehend the middle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I thought there's also the reference to the tzitzis. Of course, one has the beginning, the threads are obvious that go in, and then they are tied together in an impenetrable sort of
knots and winding
series of knots, and then they come out sort of the other side. So that was the metaphor that then transferred into the idea of that normality is somewhat of a, perhaps it's not an illusion. I mean, someone did lead.
Right. Do you know who it was? I know you're a baseball fan. No, you don't remember.
No, that I don't know. But I think the metaphor was, I think, based upon the idea, and it was an original idea that I had that I liked, the tzitzis, the idea, Shlomi, that one has, traditionally, we start with Breshit, right? We know the beginning. The beginning is Breshit, right? We know the beginning in the sense that that's also develops into Sinai, Matan Torah. We know that, right?
The giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai.
Yes, the beginning of the Torah at Mount Sinai, the giving of the Torah, the development of the Jewish people as a nation, as a chosen people and responsible to perform the mitzvot, the commandments, etc. So we know the beginning, we know the various beginnings, and we also know the end. The end is, of course, messianic. The end is the coming of the Mashiach, the Messiah, where many of the difficulties here presumably will be resolved, etc. In some sense, the end of history. And it seemed to me that that was very much descriptive of the Jewish situation, the situation of not just Jewish, but those of us, who follow the tradition in the Torah as well. That there's clarity concerning the beginning, there's clarity concerning the end. The middle is Tanakh, Talmud, Midrashim, and everything in between, with all of Jewish history, as not only given in the Tanakh, which is, of course, the story of Joseph and the selling. I mean, some pretty difficult episodes, to say the least. Some of which are resolved, some of which are not. And the world is I think, a very confusing place. That's part of the challenge, obviously, for those of us who try and make sense of the world, perhaps, and navigate it through the tradition, the halachic tradition of mitzvot and of the Jewish tradition. But it's still, even with those things, a tremendously confusing place, not the least of which is in the major story in the book is Kagan's Superfecta, as you know. And that, of course, one of the most incredible things that I brought in there is the Kagan Superfecta takes place on Yom Kippur, right? And it's a gambling Kohen on Yom Kippur that thinks he has the perfect bet, and he both does and does not, etc. And what happens is that we also read the 10 martyrs, right? Where they are tortured to death.
Right, it's an account of 10 great Jews from the era
including
of Roman persecution, who were all martyred.
And it's read traditionally on Yom Kippur. And there's a story behind that as well, going back to the great sin of the Chet of Yosef, when the brothers sold Yosef into slavery. And they pay for that in some sense later. The 10 martyrs is supposed to be connected with that.
Form of a spiritual repair, payback, or
yes, the spiritual payment in some sense is that they with the symbol is the shoes they bought shoes.
Right, and the shoes keep coming up in the story. The shoes come up.
Yeah.
The sneakers. I mean, I think I'll just summarize for the readers, who some of them may have had a chance to read this book, but it's possible others didn't, that, the story kind of starts out with Kagan getting ready for Yom Kippur, getting ready for the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, but he's also a gambling addict, it's fair to say. He bets below grade level.
Yes, he's a video reading teacher. Right?
And he gets this idea to bet the Superfecta on the horses, and he thinks he's got the winning number, and that seems to be his biggest struggle at the beginning of the story. This seemingly prosaic temptation: should I place a bet, and in contradiction to the laws of the holiest day of the year, should I go place that bet because I know, with that gambler's intuition, that it's a winning bet? But the story evolves from there. I don't want to spoil it, but the story evolves from there to, that prosaic concern of place the bet or don't place the bet, to so many other bigger things stretching into history and theology and these questions of suffering.
No, I think I think that is true. And with the 10 martyrs, when one of the 10 martyrs is being literally tortured to death, the angels, according to the Midrash, the angels scream to God, is this Torah, and this is its reward? Because these were great scholars and teachers, who were this one who's being tortured. And the answer is silence, or I will, God ke'ilu, as if, according to Midrash, God actually answers the angels and says, silence, or I will turn the world to water. Seemingly, one interpretation, obviously, is that there are certain necessities in the world that involve tragedy and involve suffering that in this world at this time we are not privy to understand. We cannot understand. I mean, i.e. the Holocaust is one of them, certainly, among other things. I mean, it can be that, the wars that we see now, the suffering, or a child with cancer. I mean, a lot of things that just beyond our ken. And so that was where that came in. The other thing is that it seems to me that another sort of a thing, I don't know, I'm not saying this balances it, but with in Beggar Moon, the woman who is the beggar also in some ways is very tough, very cynical, but also very generous with people in a way. And so is Kagan. I mean, there are Jews who are not the most learned, often have what we call a gute neshama, a very good Jewish soul, which expresses itself in very, very noble sorts of ways.
Right, and we see that in many stories. I mean, in the Gemara, some stories are coming to mind of like, particular characters who come up in Talmudic stories who don't seem very heroic at first. They seem like sinners, corrupt, and they have that redemptive moment, which like in stories is always something that we're so attracted to. If somebody's an anti-hero or just doesn't, they do something out of character at the final moment, I guess. I forget the character's name. But cities, that the famous line.
Yeah, it's a far better thing that I do.
Right.
Yeah,
that would be lahavdil, kind of the template, which we see in a lot of Jewish stories as well.
No, I think that's true, and I think that one sees it very in an astonishing way, because one of the things it seems to me about the tradition and the Talmud itself, both in the Gemara, the Mishnah as well, but essentially in the Gemara, that what one sees is one sees great complexity and sophistication, and also a thorough sort of an honesty,
and with a lot of penetrating insight to how.
I think astonishing,
Right.
penetrating psychological insights.
I want to go back to the book, to your writing for a second. You told me not to say cutting edge or brand, but I think it'll help this.
I feel sorry for your wife. You don't seem to take instruction.
I will. I want to say that we're trying to grow this podcast, and we need to be controversial. And I think the best way to be controversial is to take some shots at some celebrated authors, most of whom have been dead for 50 years or more. So basically, the point I wanted to make is that what I really like about your writing is that it's very American, but also very Jewish. And some of the great legends of American Jewish literature, who, I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying this, their works may be brilliant and well regarded and have won awards, but as a traditional Jew reading their works, you always feel there's a little bit missing here. The American side is present, but what do they really know of Judaism and its truths and its roots and its history beyond the fact of feeling, that feeling of, oh, I'm an outsider. And I know I'm an outsider, in waspy America, but I don't really know anything about what makes me an outsider. So I've always seen that as a limit in American Jewish literature. I haven't said anybody's names. I guess people could Google who I'm talking about, but we don't need to say anybody by name. But I think that line, part of what it speaks to me about is because, to me, the idea of someone leading the National League in batting is such an American thing. It's such an American reference, and then also with that historical concern of not just the Holocaust, but of all Jewish suffering. So yeah. I think that's an amazing thing that comes through in the book is, you're from St. Louis and you lived in New York before you moved here and to Israel, where we are right now. And it really comes through in the writing. It's such a potent mix of like the very particular specific feeling of being an American. And I know that comes through in your novel, but like that idea of putting together American and Jewish in a very real way.
Yeah, no. That's one of the things that I want to do. In fact, one critic referred to it as the midrashic mode, which I had initiated. That's something that I very much wanted to do, and I did very purposefully. But I think in fairness to some of the writers that you may be referring to, I think some of them knew surprisingly certain amounts, but they were.
Saul Bellow was pretty knowledgeable.
Saul Bellow was quite knowledgeable. He was even a very appreciative and enthusiastic reader of Kagan's Superfecta.
Really?
Yeah. When we were in the old city,
wow.
our first year, he came and we were in someone's home and they asked us to host him.
Is that when he wrote To Jerusalem and Back? Was that on that trip?
He wrote To Jerusalem and Back on that trip, and I'm
wow.
turning my head slightly because my wife Stephanie is in the kitchen, and she was mentioned in the book, but he did not mention her by name.
Oh, interesting.
Much to Stephanie's parents, Aleichem Hashalom, to their dismay.
Wanted to shep a little nuts.
Because he couldn't check the quote, because when he was over, they were discussing some.
He mentioned almost everybody else by name in that book. That just makes it even worse.
Well, he did. Yeah, I took some walks. I went Syrian, taking walks with him at different times, and he was very.
Okay, with all due apologies to Saul Bellow, I guess my criticisms or thoughts go to other authors.
No, he was. I think he was. I think he knew quite a bit, and he was a very interesting sort of a person. And I appreciated him because I learned a lot from his writing. I mean, I went in a different way, and he was certainly aware of that, and I think appreciative of that I was doing something somewhat different. But in fairness to him and to some of the other authors, they came earlier and they broke through and they told the American Jewish immigrant story, which is the great tradition of immigrant stories. Later, one had Chinese and Korean Americans. All the hyphens came in, all the different groups, and told their stories. So they were the pioneers, I think, in terms of Jewish writing. And then when some of us came later, I think we were.
So they kind of cleared the path for things that were more particularly.
I think so, and made it more accessible for people to write much more deeply from within the tradition, and both appreciating tradition. And one of the things my aesthetic, which I set out, was in some ways I did feel very, very American growing up in St. Louis, as you can tell from, I think, the stories. I mean, I grew up in a home that was Shomer Shabbat, and we kept kosher and involved with, but we were also deeply American, and we thought that Thanksgiving was our holiday as well. I mean that.
It was a totally different time.
That's a discussion.
Right. So
it seemed to me that the tradition and had great things to say, both in terms about modern life, both in terms of life itself, and also in terms of literature, in terms of stories. One of the things that I was always interested as a kid, Americans, Jews, we didn't seem to fit into the folklore of America and of Americana.
Cowboys, pilgrims.
There was no Schwartz's Gap, right? Later we had, of course, we made it very big with both Salk and Sabin and other, Nobel Prize winning Jews, and Frankfurter in the Supreme Court. But there wasn't anything there earlier. There wasn't Schwartz's Gap. You never had Cohen's Gulch. And then I went to time Berlin, and I was absolutely intrigued that there were students there who had come out of, their parents had survived the Holocaust. Maybe they did too as children. They'd come to America, and they were the Americans in the family, very talented young people, and they often invested the money. They were talking about some stock, some guys at lunch or something, and they were talking about Siegel uranium. And I thought, that's great. Here, we've made it. This is the modern cutting edge of the Western frontier. Gold, silver, now it's uranium, the atomic age, right? We've made it. We have Siegel uranium.
Wow.
So I said, is it Siegel uranium? They said, yeah, it's on the big board. So, okay,
we've made it. We made it. If we got a stock.
I thought we made it. So I went home, I told my wife, I said, honey, we got to invest in this
Siegel uranium.
In Siegel uranium, right? So I look up Siegel uranium. We didn't have, I couldn't find it. I borrowed some friend's Wall Street Journal. I spelled Siegel every way I could, Siegal, whatever. And I couldn't find it. And I was really, really disturbed, right? So I went back to, back to the base Midrash, the Kollel, and I found these fellows who had heard this guy. And I said, listen, I said, how do you spell it? Siegel uranium. I couldn't look it up. They said, devoid. I said, I beg your pardon? They said, the bird. It was seagull, seagull uranium. It was not seagull uranium. Once again, we
shut out again.
Yeah, we failed. We failed. So we didn't make it with seagull. But that was
it's interesting.
That was Chaim Berlin.
Well,
in those days.
You mentioned the immigrant experience. I think there's another beautiful story in this book called Jaime the Torch, which is also very much an American Jewish story. And the premise of the story, I'll share with the readers, it's fascinating. It's of a successful businessman who ultimately gets a sideline in arranging arsons for people to collect their insurance money, which formerly known in anti-Semitic parlance as Jewish lightning, right?
Very
and the story is fascinating. The conclusion is where Jaime the Torch seems to lose his passion or lose his touch or whatever it is, or stop setting the fires. And the conclusion of the story is the encounter that he has with a rabbi who's a Holocaust survivor, an immigrant from Europe. And I think in other stories also, in Building Blocks, it's the American and the immigrant in conversation, and them talking about, or trying to I guess answer these timeless Jewish questions. So I guess it's interesting to hear you talking about this, that felt as an American. It seems like you met a lot of these immigrants. So was that kind of drawn from your life, like an American encountering immigrants?
Yes, I think both.
And you yourself, I should add on, you yourself became an immigrant later in life to Israel, which, as we all know, not the easiest country to be an immigrant to.
No, that's true. I joke that I used to joke with Steffi that we gave our children. We grew up fairly well-to-do. Steffi grew up in a suburb of New York, White Plains. I grew up in Clayton, Missouri, outside St. Louis, which is we're very lovely green, suburbs, and the people that really made it in America are General Sarnoff, the people from the Lower East Side, Frankfurter also, who became a Chief Justice, right? They started out very poor, and they did incredible things in contributing to the American enterprise, both in technology and finance. Bernard Baruch was a great hero of a culture hero of American Jewry for many years. And so I used to joke that, yes, in terms of being immigrants, we came to the old city, and I said we gave our children all the advantages that we never had, that they were immigrant parents and poverty.
Right.
Not quite.
Right.
It's an exaggeration,
right.
But putting them in that situation that people faced. Yeah, no, that is true. There were things that one heard. I grew up in St. Louis, and since we were kosher and in Shomer Shabbat and in the Jewish world, there were things that one came across. There was I heard of a character who was known as Jaime the Torch. That was the basis of the story. I combined it with the idea of Havdalah, with the separation ceremony, of course, it's done on Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night.
Right, we mark the end of Sabbath observance.
Yes, and that fascination with the flame that a child has, that's part of the ceremony. One lights, it's traditionally a braided candle, mixing both the secular and the holy together, right? And I heard about him. I never met him, and then there were some midrashim and some ideas of different kinds of fire.
Right. You bring that in beautifully at the end of the story, the famous cryptic Gemara
that are there. And one had heard about what you'd heard about, Jewish lightning. And there was always the joke that one grew up with, where a guy comes up and says to him, Shlomi, I was sorry to hear about the fire. And he says, shh, it's tomorrow night. So, there were those, I guess, slightly countercultural things with insurance, but yeah. So but that sense though that the Jews had arrived later and somehow in America that one felt, I think, and which is true because the great migrations that occurred came in the beginning of the 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, after the West had already been conquered, so we couldn't read ourselves into that tradition very effectively. Right. But I think in terms, it's interesting because in terms of sports, Jews did.
We made our mark.
We read ourselves into the tradition, both as participants and especially, I would suggest, as commentators in terms of sports writers. It does date back to a far more benign period of American Jewish history.
I mean, you wrote these stories, I'm assuming, through the 70s and early 80s? Or?
Yeah, I wrote these in the 70s. Yeah, they were published, I think, the book was published in 83, 84. And that was before the explosion of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which is very...
Fortunately, it's so much part of the American Jewish experience today.
Yeah, the American Jewish experience. And Steffi and I, we met at Harvard, and there was no anti-Semitism there then, and now it's
unfortunately it's very, very present.
It's very difficult situation there for Jewish students, which is to us came as a tremendous shock.
Here in Israel, you essentially started a creative writing program in Bar-Ilan. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I was one of the founders. Yeah, the Shandy Rudolph creative writing master's program at Bar-Ilan. I was the
it's fair to say between writing and your teaching work and starting an actual creative writing program, so you've made storytelling and the value of it and teaching it like a central part of your life.
Yes. Yeah, I like stories, and I like...
And why is it that you think you've made it such a central part of your life?
I was always drawn to stories, and I was drawn to biblical stories as a kid. I was drawn to the stories of the American West. I like stories. I think they're very interesting. I think they're very insightful. I think they're very entertaining, and very instructive. And ultimately, I suppose, if pushed, as you're asking, I would say that stories are ultimately a way of making sense of the world. The basic story, of course, that we have is Bereshit, Genesis, which is the story of creation. I think maybe the most majestic and beautiful in all of literature. But I think that one takes a world of seemingly chaos, and one makes sense out of it by turning it into a story and telling a story, because a story brings order to the world, I think. And I think one of the things that fascinated me about people, individuals, and the fact that you have like someone like Kagan, who is both very noble and very, very, very venal at the same time, right? In terms of
takes advantage of people sometimes.
And also
doesn't always show so much sensitivity to people. But he has the self-awareness to question it,
and it sometimes could show great awareness, and kindness to people as well. But I think one of the things that kind of interests me in terms of the modern world as well, which is more the Small World series, which I wrote about, starts in Tisha B'Av in Eastern Europe, the Tisha B'Av, the day of destruction of the temple, and etc. In terms of you're noting my fine eye for destruction,
suffering. And
no. I'm afraid I stand somewhat guilty of that. But part of that is the response to that and where it comes from. And one of the things that interests me very much in terms of stories and that it's developed further in the novels of that series are the fact that people have essentially not the exact same experience. Every individual is different. We know that. But people look out and they respond so very differently to the same world. I mean, one can look out and find God in the world. One can look out and find no God in the world.
Nothing is meaningless.
I mean, one can find, become a nihilist from seeing what's around, or one can become super sensitive. And these are the same things, whether responding to the Holocaust or the creation of the State of Israel, or or COVID-19, the epidemic years that we've had, followed by these war years. One can find faith, one can lose faith. It's just, to me, that's always very, very fascinating. The people respond so very differently to different kinds of things. In fact, the Small World series is the fact that, and also the fascination with individuals and the value of people, I think also make stories to me, a very kind of fascinating and an important way of viewing the world. In terms of the tradition, there's Tractate Derech Eretz Zuta, which deals with the way of the small tractate of the ways of the world, etc. What I took for an epigraph was from there, which I think addresses it very directly. And I think it's an astonishing statement. Not only is man a small world, right, the etc., but the Midrash states that even man's eye is a small world. The orb is the globe. The white is the encircling ocean. The iris is the dry land. The pupil is Jerusalem. And the image reflected in the pupil is the holy temple. May it soon be rebuilt in our days and in the days of all Israel. Amen. I mean, I think it's an astonishing quote, both literarily and both philosophically, and both and anthropomorphically as well. That the eye itself, the holy temple, is the image that's reflected in the pupil. That sense of life and personality, that almost indefinable, ephemeral intimacy that one gets by glancing at someone's eye. That glance is the remembrance of on Tisha B'Av the temple was destroyed, and that may it be rebuilt. I mean, it seems to me that compresses and brings together an amazing amount of psychology, of history, of emotion, personality, history. Just
going back to the idea you mentioned before of people seeing things, and then each person could be taken a different way or drawn a different way. I think one of the biggest things that we see in Kagan Superfecta is that Kagan himself is drawn in multiple ways. He's tempted in one way, drawn in this way, triggered into one thing, and one of the ways that you do that so beautifully and interestingly in the story is through the character of Azi, who when you first start reading the story, it's just this other character who's talking to, his personal angel who's talking to. And as the story develops, and for sure in the conclusion of the story, we finally see who that really is. And there's other people or entities who Kagan starts to be in conversation with, and they start to reveal truths to him and educate him. So could you talk a little bit about the character of Azi in the story and where that comes from in the Jewish tradition, from the Midrash?
Azi is short for Azazel, it turns out in the story. And Azazel is a fallen angel. And where Azazel appears most prominently in the tradition, of course, is in the Torah on Yom Kippur, where there's the famous scapegoat. They're the two goats. In fact, one of the things that is the motivation for the plot with the character with Kagan is he feels he has this perfect bet. Superfecta is you have to pick 4 horses in order, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the same race, which is essentially a lottery. I mean,
Right.
you can't, unless the race is fixed, it's pretty hard to do that. It's a true gambler's kind of illusion that
I think people still do that now with 3 or 4 different NFL teams. Like you pick the winners, but the result has to be the same in all the games or something.
Yeah, there are all kinds of exotic bets.
Right.
This years ago was thought to be an exotic bet, the Superfecta. Now they have all kinds of things.
I mean, also it's such a great. I'm for sure going to butcher this word, but it's a onomatopoeic kind of, just like the sounds of it. Kagan Superfecta. It's such a phenomenal word and such a great title. I think that's what actually grabbed me about the book. When I saw this, I'm like, who's Kagan and what's a Superfecta? You know.
Mm-hmm. You're aware that Kagan is a Kohen.
Kohen, yeah.
By name.
It's the Russian, meaning the Russian pronunciation turns an H into a G. So that's how it was explained to me, that Kagan is really Kohen.
Very good. That's why the great Shakespearean play in Russian is known as Gamlet, from Hamlet, the G and the H switch. I think it's astonishing, to anyone who thinks about it, is that the high priest in the temple, part of the worship service, the practice on Yom Kippur, was they would bring 2 goats in, and that there was a lottery drawn on the goats, a true lottery, absolute, gambling, and not gambling, but
right.
Truly in the sense that it's not deterministic, it's
random,
it's
by
just
chance.
random, by total chance, right? A lottery, and one goat then became to Lashem, to Kodesh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, for God, which is in part of the temple service.
It'll be offered as
the other
sacrifice.
one is the famous scapegoat. And the scapegoat comes from Azazel, means, according to some interpretations, very rough land where it was thrown down to die in the desert. So the scapegoat was then taken out, and with all the sins of Israel supposedly, and pushed over the cliff, and would as a tribute apparently to a figure, a shohad, a bribe of sorts, to the devil. This is problematic theologically in halacha, as you know.
Sure.
I mean, if you've learned, Yuma, etc. And it's not an easy kind of to resolve and understand that. So Azazel was the angel out there who received it somewhat symbolically, according to this a midrashic interpretation. And who was Azazel? Azazel, when man is created, there's one of the things also that I liked about with Ozzy, that he's the angel who wants to lead Kagan astray, right? An angel, Kagan's problems are gambling, and Ozzy's problems, he's a womanizer, right? And that there's this tension always between the angels and man. And the tension between the angels when according to the Midrash, when God went to create man, the angels said no, right? They opposed him. And part of the story there too, it was brought in those Midrashim, where it said man will be a murderer. And they said, yeah, if he wouldn't be a murderer, God answers the angels, if he wouldn't be a murderer, he wouldn't work to develop that's the same motivation, to develop the world, etc. And it said he'll be an adulterer. It said, but if he wouldn't have the sexual urge, then he wouldn't people the earth, etc. So those are very complex ideas, right? That there's a very good side and a very difficult side as well. And that sense of basic motivations, can be both very, very virtuous and also certainly far less than that. And there were some of the angels said that that man is just terrible, and God, according to Midrashim, that God says to the angels, if you were there, you wouldn't do any better. And they said, oh, we'd do better. So they were put into the world, and they all failed, right? Some became like Azazel, went after women, some went after wealth, some went after whatever, all kinds of terrible things, right? And then, since they had sinned, they couldn't get back to, one of the Midrashic explanations is that they couldn't get back to heaven, right? So how could they get back to heaven? And it took man to redeem them.
The angels.
They who had they who had criticized man so harshly, and then needed him, and according to with this the Sulam Yaakov, the ladder of Jacob, when he's fleeing and he has the dream and he sees the angels ascending and descending. There are various interpretations, of course, midrashically, who those angels are, but one interpretation is the angels going up were the fallen angels who needed man,
Wow.
the tzaddik, the righteous man, Yaakov, to permit them to return to heaven. And even then there were some very, very stubborn holdouts who wouldn't, and one of whom was Azazel, supposedly. So he remains out in the desert, and that's where the goat is taken. So that sort of intrigued me, that figure, and that he comes in. And in some sense in the story, which is, of course, my version of fiction, is that in some sense here Azazel does do some sense of tshuva, right, through the fallen human sense of Kagan in certain ways, where he when he comes back, and that and they shared that companionship together.
There's a beautiful Hasidic idea. You're mentioning how the angels oppose the human being's existence. So there's an idea that when God created the world, God created the world and created human beings, he took a little bit of everything and put it into the human being. And when we say that God took everything, it means he took everything. So one of the things that he took and put into the human being was the angel's opposition to the creation of man. And that was placed in us, that idea that actually we shouldn't exist, or that there's somebody who thinks that we shouldn't exist because of our flaws. That is part of the human makeup. And, I forget exactly who said this. I heard it from my father, blessed memory, but it might have been an Ishbit's idea. But that explains the death wish and our self-destructive instincts, which comes out so much in the story. Where Kagan is, seems to be taking his own life apart sometimes, with his own hands.
No, absolutely.
And that's where it comes from, this idea that, there's a voice inside of us that's not really us. I mean, Hashem put it in us to challenge us, but it's an idea of that voice that's telling us, you're no good, and, everything you do is bad.
The Rosh Hashiva of Chaim Berlin, of course, the Pachad Yitzchak, he once turned to this young student and he said, I suppose you believe that man is, it's chemical, mental illness, if we knew what was going on. And the student said, yeah, I suppose if we could understand the chemical aspect of the mind, which we don't know, but, he said, no.
I mean, we could get rid of negative behavior? Or
Yes, one could control things, one could solve cure certain mental illnesses and things, which we know nothing about now, etc., how that could be done, etc. And the Rosh Hashiva turned to him and said, no. He said, when God went to create man, there were angels who opposed it. And they were screaming, no, do not create man. And when God created man, as you just mentioned, Shlomi, there's the Midrash that man is created from everything in the world, so he should somehow feel at home in the world, right? From every element. He said, and part of man is also those angels who are screaming, no, don't create him. They're also part of the creation of man. So the Rosh Hashiva turned to this young student and said, and he was often very dramatic and as a teacher, right? And he said, it's not chemical, it's cosmic.
Wow. I would use that as the tagline for this podcast or for anything. It's not chemical, it's cosmic. It's such an important thing to think about.
No, so that those elements are part of man. Also, I think some Hasidic ideas are the Avirin is also the, I'm told, according to Bratslav, and I'm not an expert on this, and if I'm wrong, I apologize to any of your viewers.
Maybe they'll correct us in the comments.
If you write into Shlomi, that Avirin, it refers to the basic tohu vavohu, the primordial chaos of the world. And there's an element of that also in man, according to some Hasidic ideas, I'm told. Yeah. And that was another version of it being cosmic and not chemical, that there is part of that. But I think that part of what it addresses, and part of what I find compelling, and the source, I think, of great literature. Whether one finds it in going all the way back to Homer and Greece, etc., and all the way through. For me, it's Shakespeare and I guess Tolstoy are the great element writers for me, and as a reader, is that's mankind, women are capable, as we see in today's world, of capable of such outrageous, horrendous cruelty, and using those great human talents and skills and strengths God-given to perform these horrendous acts. And at the same time, one gets not just the Tanoim and the Amorim are the great traditional teachers of our tradition, and great rabbis, but one also has indeed one has Shakespeare and Tolstoy and Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and Rembrandt and astonishing creations of I think that are universally recognized, of great beauty.
Right.
And
also great moral beauty and
that I think inspire all of us, make us all proud to be human beings, as much as the other side makes us cringe and be embarrassed that somehow we are part of the same world as some of the intense evildoers that Hamas, for example.
Right.
I mean, they're essentially
part of the same human race.
Yeah.
We're all part of the same human race.
Yes. Yes, fortunately and unfortunately. Yes, that's the name, I think, of one of the names of literature, is that both of those extremes are intensely recognizable.
Thank you so much for your time today, Professor. And if you just want to, if there's one final message you could leave off with to our viewers, again, the explicit and implicit goal of this podcast is really just to encourage people to engage more with these Jewish stories. So from your very esteemed and experienced vantage point as an author of amazing fiction, as a teacher of how to write, and a master of storytelling, what would you say to encourage people to, whether they want to be writers or whether they're just readers, what would you say to them to encourage them to be more engaged with these classic stories?
I think one they have to read. I mean,
it's a dying art. Meaning we read more text than ever, but we're not actually reading.
Yeah. No. I think one has to read, and I think to enjoy the world, but I think if one has the privilege of having the benefit of being able to enter the traditional texts, both the Bible, Tanakh, right, and the Talmud and the Midrashim, enjoy. I mean, it's Yam HaTalmud, the sea of the Talmud, the ocean of the Talmud, right, and I think it's to be explored, and the term Yam HaTalmud is both, I think, very instructive. On the one hand, it's thoroughly natural. The greater part of the planet, we are told, the ocean. On the other hand, it's it's an area where one doesn't normally function, and one has to develop certain skills to get into it. And I think I would encourage, both the if one can study the tradition and engage it, that's quite wonderful, and and it can be engaged on many levels. And I think it's both enriching, obviously, but more than enriching, I think it's enlightening. I mean, the world that we look out, which often is chaotic, seemingly chaotic and difficult to navigate and to negotiate. I think it provides certain tools of navigation and that permit to not only find one place, but to perhaps even then enjoy it. I mean, the three great questions supposedly are, one of them is that after 120 years, right, then, have you enjoyed my world, Kodesh Baruch Hu, God asks, right? And sometimes these days it's not so easy. One has to, and I think the tradition employs certain things. So Shlomi, I want to thank you for coming.
I just want to add one thing to what you said. You said to talk about navigating the sea, and I think that's also such a important idea. You know, we see that in so many classic stories are ocean-going stories and stories of a journey, and life is a journey, and the only way you can, you know, truly traverse that journey is if you enter that sea of stories and ideas and inspiring figures.
I think
the ocean is deep and mysterious. Also, there's a lot. You know,
there's that's very well said. I once wrote some things about the Leviathan and the herring.
The two great Jewish fish.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Wow. Okay, thank you so much.
So Shlomi, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate
pleasure.
making the effort to do so.